Tonight, sound the alarm. Some top Democrats on Capitol Hill saying we are now having a constitutional crisis. I'll ask a former federal prosecutor to weigh in on that and also the latest developments in the Mueller Report. And as usual, there's a lot to report. Then, Florida has just passed a law that allows for the arming of teachers in the classroom. I'll debate someone who says this is a great idea. Also, President Trump ramping up his trade war with China. He says he loves tariffs, but we're going to show you why consumers, farmers, and American companies don't. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Now, the battle over the Mueller report, it is not going away. Just take a listen to House Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler and the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, assessing where we are right now.
We've talked for a long time about approaching a constitutional crisis. We are now in it.
Do you agree with Chairman Nadler that the country is currently in a constitutional crisis?
Yes, I do agree with Chairman Nadler because the administration has decided that they are not going to honor their oath of office.
Now, during a rambling news conference this afternoon, the president, he railed against the Mueller probe and also against the aforementioned Jerry Nadler.
Should never, ever happen again to a president. 2 years I've been going through this nonsense, and now we have a good report. And now guys like Jerry Nadler, who I fought for many years, successfully, I might add, back in New York in Manhattan. He was a Manhattan congressman. I beat him all the time. And I come to Washington, and now I have to beat him again. Over nothing, over a hoax.
Now, Trump also commented on the subpoena issued for his son, Donald Trump Jr., by the Republican-led Senate Intelligence Committee.
My son, after being exonerated, to now get a subpoena to go again and speak again after close to 20 hours of telling everybody that would listen about a nothing meeting? Yeah, I'm pretty surprised.
President also asked whether or not he would let Bob Mueller testify. Again, in the past, he said he would. He now says he's going to leave the decision up to the Attorney General. Former federal prosecutor Mimi Rocha joins us now. There's so much to unpack here, but I want to go back to what we just heard and also a letter that you and 700 plus other former federal prosecutors under different administrations, different political leanings. The Speaker and the Majority Leader, or I should say the Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, said we're in a constitutional crisis. Are they hyping it, or are we there now?
Well, look, I think that term raises people's, blood pressure and is anxiety provoking. So I think part of it depends what people mean by that. I think Nancy Pelosi actually gave it a definition. She said, I agree because the administration is not honoring its oath. So she's pointing to the fact that the administration, the president, is saying, I'm not going to respond to any subpoena, which is not a sort of a faithful execution of the laws, which is part of his oath, right? And to me, whatever you call it, it is certainly it is a problem, and it is at crisis level, because when you have anybody, but especially the president, saying a blanket no to any kind of lawful process, legal proceedings, that's not sustainable. And he's making himself essentially immune from oversight by a co-equal branch. So I think that we can use that term because it's a shorthand for where we are. I don't think it's necessarily something that can't be fixed, although it's going to take time. And the fix, the hope, is in the courts. And that's why maybe it's not quite a crisis yet, a constitutional crisis yet, because we still have that other branch of government that is going to come in, and I hope will, based on the rule of law and what I think is pretty clearly in the Democrats' favor on almost all of these issues, will rule against the administration.
I've been saying in recent days that up until recently, I thought that even with all his greatest efforts, that the brilliance of the Founding Fathers limited the scope of damage that any one individual could do. But when the president openly talks about, and the Speaker made reference to this week, that he may not abide by an election result. And now basically, as you said, there is no oversight from what is supposed to be the principal job here, or one of Congress. And he says, never mind, you and I couldn't ignore a subpoena, right? I mean, you as a former federal prosecutor, people went to jail for things like that. But there doesn't seem to be any consequence. Did the founding fathers never imagine someone like Trump? Or is it that we've never tested the enforcement of the threats?
I mean, I think that in some ways they imagined someone like Trump, but they didn't imagine the Republican Party as it now exists. Because the reason this is falling apart and feels like such a crisis is because the Democrats are having to do this alone. If you had any kind of bipartisanship, right, and I will talk about a little bit later, there seems to be one little flicker of it in the Senate Intelligence Committee. But if you had any kind of bipartisanship, and obviously you're not going to have that on everything, but on some of these most extreme things that Trump does, like saying, I'm not going to respond to any subpoena no matter what, for example, I mean, just to give one example, or calling a lawful investigation a witch hunt, or, I mean, there's so many examples over the years, then I think the system would work. And so that's why I point now to the courts, but that's dangerous too, because look, some people say the courts are packed. I still have faith in Judiciary, and we shouldn't have to fall back on that.
Right.
It should be in the political process that it gets worked out, but that's why people were so, okay, now we have Democrats at least in power in the House, they're not powerless, so now we can have some oversight. But that only works if you don't have a president who, I mean, he has no shame, so he's okay with saying, no, I'm not going to. And that's when that process doesn't work, he shouldn't be allowed to get away with that. And that's when the Republicans should step up. And frankly, the Attorney General. I don't think they imagine an Attorney General quite this politicized.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because I remember the confirmation process, and maybe I was hearing what I wanted to hear, Mimi, but I didn't see why a guy like Barr, with his resume, would sign on to be a rubber stamp and I think to stain what was otherwise, forgetting your political leanings, an eminently respected career. Why would he do some of the things he's done?
I don't know. I don't know what's motivating him, but I think that you're exactly right in that, you know, you could agree or disagree with Barr's politics before this, or like him for what he didn't do in the past, but it wasn't as explicitly partisan in the sense that he is really acting as Trump's defense attorney, that's beyond politics. I mean, it is just not the role of the Attorney General, right? That is absolutely not his job. He go in Congress and on paper and in the rollout of the Mueller Report, he makes factual arguments for Trump. He says, well, he was upset, as if that's a defense, which it's not, to obstruction of justice. Even if it were, that's not his job. How does he know he was upset? Trump didn't testify. He's inserting his own facts into the record here and then drawing his own conclusions. That's what a defense attorney could and should do, but not the Attorney General.
He's making political arguments, like you said, that he cost him 2 years of his administration and all the rest,
using
which
terms
is just
spying.
Jarring when you hear it coming from the AG. You mentioned before a flicker and that reference with the Intel Committee. In the Senate, Senator Burr, Republican, and the blowback he got, by the way, that he's not a real Republican because he had the temerity onto. What's going on here? Why do they want to hear from Donald Trump Jr. again?
Well, look, I think there's a couple of reasons. One is, I think given what we know now, as opposed to what we and even Congress knew at the time when Trump Jr. testified, there's almost certainly were statements that were in there that were untrue. Now, could he be prosecuted for perjury for those? I don't know. I haven't scoured the transcript enough. Perjury and false statements, as probably many in the public now know that they didn't know before, is actually very specific. And you have to really have, you have to ask the right questions and get the right answer. That you have to have narrowly tailored questions to be able to prove that kind of falsehood and intent So it's easy to get around it. And my sense is that in his first testimony, they weren't focused as much, and so they probably got around that. Doesn't mean they want him to come testify just to get him to lie. But if we know that he didn't tell the full truth before, and they know now more than they did before, you want to ask those questions again, or at least try to get to the truth. We know that Michael Cohen, for example, because he pled guilty to it, did lie about the Trump Tower Moscow project and how long that was going on. And that was something that Don Jr. testified about, and I don't think was fully forthcoming. So I think they legitimately, when you know, as an investigator, when you have more information, now, oh wait, I've got new questions. And also, I think it's becoming more and more apparent to people that Mueller kept a very, very narrow focus, probably more than I think anyone really expected in terms of his investigation, at least as far as we've seen. We haven't seen any kind of results of the counterintelligence, of a financial investigation.
Now, what he also did, he being Mueller, is he referred or outsourced a bunch of cases, including to your old stomping grounds in the Southern District. 14, I believe, between there, Eastern District, et cetera. So, give an idea, especially with the tax returns that the Times printed yesterday, or this week, I should say, kind of the scope of some of the cases that could be coming out and the timeline that's attached to it, because a lot of people have told me that that's where we ought to look at, even more so than the Mueller report, where they may go next. Do you share that?
I do think that, you know, the Southern District and every U.S. Attorney's office that has one of these referrals, and even ones that don't, and the New York AG's office, as you know, in many ways has more freedom than Mueller did. Mueller, and as we were just saying a moment ago, he read his mandate very narrowly and focused very much on the election, the campaign, and the transition. These other prosecutors and investigators have the ability to look at anything, both before, you know, Trump even became a candidate, and after, and his financial connections and investments and possible frauds, and just a much broader net. And that's usually how cases, good cases, often develop, is you sort of get a kernel, and I know we've talked many times about following the money. They really can do that. So I think that leeway is there. I think that they will, I have faith that the federal prosecutors, I'm just putting them in a separate category from the state for a moment because it is a different animal, that they will, if there are cases there, pursue them. I also think, though, that they will be limited by the same thing Mueller was, which is the OLC opinion that says a sitting president shouldn't be indicted. So what they will do with information if they find that in his past Trump committed financial crimes, for example, I don't know. It's going to be hard, and I think that's a really hard position for them to be in, but I still think, as Mueller said, that they can be investigated. Something can be done with that information to preserve it. It's possible, if the crimes are blatant enough, that they would go and ask permission to be released from the OLC memo, but that would be a hard thing to do.
Last timing question, the big three, if you will, Dunn, Barr, and obviously Mueller himself. Is it your sense that we're going to hear from some, all of them, sooner, later? What's your sense?
I think we will. And look, if I were in Congress, I would push for Mueller first. Like, that would be the one I would be really pushing for two reasons. One, I think that even though we might not get a lot of additional information from Mueller than what we already have in the report, because I think he's likely to be extremely conservative about what he's willing to talk about, so many people haven't read the report or have only read parts of the report. So even having Mueller go through some of the, you know, with the right questioning, go through some of the high points of the report, not just in the obstruction area, even in the first part that people have just, you know, Trump likes to write off as no collusion, no collusion, I think would be very worthwhile. And for people to see Bob Mueller and his character and his integrity, that he is anything but a witch hunter, I think would be very useful. We might get more beyond that too. I think we need to know, how did his investigation end? Why did it end? What happened with Barr? And secondly, I think they have a very strong legal argument about Mueller testifying, because everything in Mueller's report has already gone outside the executive branch. There is an excellent argument for any kind of waiver of any kind of possible executive privilege. And I think a great deal of what's in the report wouldn't have been covered by executive privilege to begin with. For example, anything having to do with before he was president.
Right.
There are probably arguments to make, but they're weak ones. So I think they have strongest legal arguments with respect to Mueller. I think it would do it would be the if you had to get one witness out there, that's who I would do. I mean, I think Don McGahn could be very powerful also, but I think that's going to be harder to get.
Never dull. It's great seeing you.
You too.
Especially in person.
Thanks
All
for
right.
having me.
When we come back here, we're going to pivot to another story that we've been talking quite a bit about, and that is arming teachers. Florida just passed a bill allowing it. I think it's a terrible idea. And after the break, I'll debate a man who thinks it is just the security schools need. Stay with us.